Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of KurosawaCast. I am your host Rob, and I'm joined as ever by Craig. Hello, Craig.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Rob.
This time around, this time around, we're talking about Kurosawa's 1949 film Stray Dog. If you're joining us for the first time, I'm a big Kurosawa fan. Seen all the movies multiple times. Craig is a very big cinephile, seen a lot of movies in his time, film teacher, filmmaker, and he's coming to the Kurosawa films fresh from the off, and we're now at his sixth film. No, further than that, aren't we? We're much further in because we've been doubling up. Ninth film, exactly. We're at his ninth film, Stray Dog. So basically, as always, I'm drawing some quotes from Kurosawa's autobiography.
Oh, that's the first time we've seen that. That's the first time we've seen the cover. Yeah. I think so.
And the Donald Ritchie book, The Films of Akira Kurosawa, also a source that's very valuable if people are interested in playing along at home. So basically, let's recap. As we say, you've been coming in blind. You've read like the Wikipedia entries and the synopsis on the player that you're watching them on. You've been reading like the synopsis, and that's it, right? So recap again what your expectations were for this one going in.
So Stray Dog, I did have it up and running and ready, and I've had This is man look something up on a computer. If I play a Stray Dog,
it wasn't Sam Fuller again, was it? That you said
it wasn't Sam Fuller. I played the Fuller card yet again for Scandal, which we were thinking we were going to fold into this one, which we're not. No, this to me, it sounded like a kind of noirish, but maybe the. It's a great start, isn't it? The synopsis says, when rookie detective Murakami has his pistol stolen from his pocket while on a bus, his frantic attempt market in the Tokyo was from pickpocket to a young gangster. Murakami's gun is identified as the weapon in the shooting of a woman. Murakami, overwhelmed with remorse, turns for help from his older and more experienced senior Sato. A superb performance by Takashi Shimura. The race is on to find the shooter before he can strike again. So to me, that sounded quite a lot like something in the flavor of a John Frankenheimer or a William Friedkin. It sounded like that sort of hard-boiled 70s police thriller is what I was kind of half expecting from this. And
how did it stack up against, spoiler warning for your ultimate thoughts on the film, but how did it rate against what your expectations were?
Well, considering like a lot of, most of my references, I've seen films, I've seen a lot of international films, but probably like most people on this side of the pond, most of my film references are British or American. And one of my early notes on this is not an American story. Straight away. So it starts on this really hot, sweaty kind of tram trolley. It's very much like the beginning of One Beautiful Sunday, actually. People sort of, I think it's One Beautiful Sunday, where he's on the train and all bunched in and everybody's in there together, but it's clearly very hot, everybody's sweating, it's uncomfortable, it's close. Murakami, Mifune, he realizes he's had his gun stolen, and immediately goes to his superior to tell him.
Well, it actually shows it like a flashback, doesn't it?
Flashback, that's right. Yeah.
It starts establishing the hot day with the close up of the panting dog over the credits, and then which there's an amusing Akira as Partridge quote from his book coming up. About that.
Brilliant! Yeah, I was a little bit worried when the opening shot was of a stray dog.
You thought this is going to be really literal.
But straight away he's really upset about this one lost gun, and I was thinking that was my first clue. It was like, well, you can't tell this story in America, you can probably wander down the street and find a gun that's been dropped by somebody in almost any city in America. No one's going to worry about a lost gun over there. Go down to the vending machine, get another one. But he's really, really upset, and his superiors don't seem quite as bothered as he does, even. But he immediately establishes that he's lost this gun and it's got 7 bullets in it, and he's completely crestfallen, and wants to find this weapon.
I think the setup of there being 7 bullets in it is the best thing in the whole film. Like, I love it because they treat it like the criminals who've got the gun. They couldn't possibly acquire new bullets. They have these 7 bullets, and then the bullets ended up sort of coming into it near the end, don't they? Like how many are left in the gun becomes kind of a factor.
I mean, we'll get into that later, but the 7 bullets is so well set up and kind of ridiculous until the end, when it pays off beautifully, like absolutely beautifully. But so he goes off. He's a detective in the 1st division of investigation, whatever that means.
He's in homicide, isn't he? He's a homicide cop. But there's it's
sent down to the 3rd division to talk to the pickpocket cops, who show him some pictures of some people, and he identifies this woman who he thinks might have done it, and the guy's like, oh yeah, she's well known, and then it kind of, you're set off on this journey, jumping from person to person on the trail of this gun, throughout the kind of Tokyo underworld, really, and it just moves at quite a really, really quick pace. It's really it's like it's an excuse, really, more than anything, to navigate through the world than there is a forward plot and there is a narrative momentum, but it's not it's not the American action film, or the American cop procedural kind of thing that I was thinking. It's like it's a tour of the underworld, really, and it's that's kind of how it goes on from there. There's lots to say about it.
I think as well, like the main thing, because when you were saying originally how it's not really an American film, it's not an American story the way it's told. You're obviously talking about the problem over there being this one gun and it being difficult to acquire guns. But like the thing to me that's really un-American about it is the way that how contrite he is. Like there is no, like you would never get imagine this was Clint Eastwood as a cop and he's lost his gun. He's not going to go head in hand to his boss on the verge of tears, say, oh, I'm really sorry. And every time a crime is committed with the gun, he's not going to be like, oh my God, was that my gun? I've basically done this, haven't I? And it's all about that soul searching and this kind of moral turmoil about, because I was watching it with my mother-in-law. She was here last night. We were watching it. And she was just like, why are people so hysterical about this? Why is he so upset? Come on. Get over it. It's not that big a deal. Yeah. She was really sort of, and I was sort of like, well, yeah, but the point is that, yeah, like to the other cops as well, to his superiors, isn't a big deal. But it's about his interior kind of mind about this, and is kind of worried that he is responsible for the all the crimes that happen with it. And one of the things that happens is almost like a ticking clock with the 7 bullets. Is throughout the film, as he's navigating the underworld, you're getting him read bits in the newspaper about a bank robbery, a murder, and being like, was that my gun? And he's obsessed with it. So yeah, I thought.
Yeah. I mean that the thing that it was kicked off about a missing gun was that I wrote not an American story, but you're absolutely right. As it progresses, the kind of the themes and the concerns of the films is not something I would expect to see delivered in the same way at all. It's a very sort of philosophical film. It's a very empathetic film. It's a very there's themes about. There's themes of determinism, and if it wasn't my gun, it would be somebody. It wasn't your gun, it would be somebody else's gun. And there are like parallels between Mifune's character and the guy who actually ends up with the gun, that are to do with sort of determinism and circumstance and luck. And my life could have gone his way, and it all ties into the idea that although Mifune he's kind of like the there's a thing that goes on later in the film as well, where there's an idea that he's young and idealistic, and that's why he's taking it so badly, and that to be a good police officer, he's going to have to lose that, and it's quite a bleak outlook actually. Yeah. When you get towards the end, it's really, really, really good. It's incredible. The sense of like heat and sweat is palpable throughout the whole thing. Yeah. Everyone is glistening. Lots and lots of really close framing. People sort of dripping, dabbing themselves, fanning themselves.
My favorite was a little bit of business where Takashi Shimura, who plays because basically I don't know if you said, but Mifune is like a rookie cop. Takashi Shimura turns up maybe 40. I think it's about 40 minutes into the film. Right. He turns up, and he's like the veteran who then takes Mifune through the rest of the movie as his kind of guide and mentor, I suppose. And he's a bit more cynical. There's a great bit of business Shimura has. I think Shimura steals this movie. I think I've been a Shimura fanboy from the beginning of this pod, but I love him in this. But like, there's a great bit of business where he's like talking to a woman who's, I think it's a shop or something, and she's got one of those rotating fans, and she's got it stuck blowing on her. And just while he's talking to her, he like slaps the back of the fan so that it rotates and like comes and does it to him as well. And that was one of I'm not suggesting this means anything, but there's also a bit where they're talking to this guy who's running a bath, like he works in a hotel. And at one point during the conversation, Shimura just walks over and turns on the shower and turns the shower off again. And I just love how he messes with the props.
Yeah, there is lots of that. Like he lights the place up. I mean, it's quite an earnest role for Mifune. Like he's in turmoil and he's kind of panicked and he not to say he's bad in it, but he's not given.
He's shackled by it, isn't he? He's shackled by the role because he's at his best. I think you could probably tell already from what you've seen. He's at his best when he's allowed to kind of go off the deep end a bit, like in Drunken Angel when he's kind of goes a bit mad. And you kind of get that through, like, for example, when you see Seven Samurai or when you see Rashomon, his most celebrated roles in many ways are ones where he's kind of goes, plays someone a bit crazy. He really is the straight man here. And Shimura's role is the fun one.
But the thing is, it doesn't really matter because it moves at such a pace, and you see so much of the city. I mean, you go into tea shops, nightclubs. You go into a hospital, which I was pretty sure was a set from The Quiet Jewel. It looked exactly the same. You go to a baseball game. You go through. You go on these walks. You go into these slum houses. You go into this. You go into the hideout of one of the pickpockets. It's really, really close, little kind of cluttered hovel, and then there's this little window above an elevated train, and the lights of the train are flicking. You're just kind of there's so many locations and extra characters that pop in just for every now and then. It's the scope of it is although it's about the underworld, and although it's not like, when I say scope, I'm not talking like huge vistas and big crowds and all that kind of stuff, but the scope of walking through the marketplaces, going to the baseball game, going to the nightclubs, going to the tea rooms, it's big. Like it seems like it was an expensive film. It wouldn't have been quick and easy to shoot all these sets and places in a way that it has scale that some of his other his previous films don't. Not even No Regrets for Our Youth, which is kind of similarly quite large. Something like the Sanshiro Sagata films are quite small, 2 or 3 locations. Quiet Jewel, which we talked about last time.
Even Drunken Angel is kind of contained to one sort of little area of a city, isn't it?
Yeah. But this is sprawling, like it's huge, absolutely huge. There's some weird business as well around time here as well. Like there's this long sequence when he's sort of told, well, if you want to track down a pickpocket, you've got to think like a pickpocket. You've got to be around the pickpockets. And he kind of he dresses in rags and wanders around the markets and the back alleys for a good 10 minutes, and there's all overlays and dissolves and cuts, and it's him looking and people looking at people and the dirt, and there's like these impressive shots of like I guess sort of sex workers being like in silhouette through a grate, like seemingly up through a subway, and it goes through day and night, and you're never quite sure. That sequence could be like a day, it could be a week, it could be a month. Like it turns out it's much smaller length of time, but there is this kind of sense that he's drinking in the city and seeing everything that goes around it, and it goes on for a good 10 minutes. You'd think it would be too long, but actually it just kind of, it's this real slow kind of easing into, this is the milieu that we're dealing with here. Kind of reminds me of, in a way. I mean, it's not as extreme, obviously, but it reminds me of. It reminds me a little bit of something like something that it's not. There's a film called Rampart that's got this sort of Gaspar Noé-ish style scene in the middle of it, where Woody Harrelson goes into this club, and it's kind of this. You just sort of drink the club in for a little while. It's that sort of thing. It's very, very atmospheric.
It's interesting you bring this bit up because Donald Ritchie in his kind of essay on the film in his book, he tears this bit a new one. He absolutely hates it. Yeah, he talks about how this bit is just too long. It feels like it goes on for hours and hours, and he's really down on it. And I agree with you. Like, I really like the patience of it. I like that it puts you in that place and gives you that sense of that location. And also, there's so many examples in it of what we were talking already about the heat and the I love the sweatiness of this film. I love that the backs of everyone's suit jackets are drenched. I love every opportunity the film takes, including this sequence, to kind of give you that atmosphere, to give you that time and place.
What's really nice. Yeah, what's really nice is there's obviously some near-realism things going on. Some of it feels like it's been filmed surreptitiously as well, and it goes on so long that although it is mainly it's pure Kuleshov, it's somebody looking, what are they looking at, back and forth, but it goes on so long that you start to question whether or not he's still looking for the gun, or if he's taking in what he sees around him, which obviously comes into play later on, where he gets more and more philosophically kind of torn by what's going on. So he's clearly sort of understanding the situation of the streets and what's going on in occupied Tokyo. It
was an interesting, this is really sort of a side sort of trivia thing almost, but Donald Ritchie does make an interesting point about the film, which is that it was made around the same time as Bicycle Thieves, which was a film that Kurosawa really liked as well when he did see it. And what Ritchie points out that's quite interesting, doesn't necessarily say anything, but it's just kind of interesting to think about, is that the criminal in this film, the guy who's got the gun at the very end, who Mifune catches up with and arrests, he's got the same arc really as the protagonist of Bicycle Thieves, because the protagonist of Bicycle Thieves is a good person who gets his bike nicked and then is driven to crime and steals a bike as a result. And the guy who is apprehended at the end, similarly, he's a guy who's come back from the war. He's a soldier. He's on hard times, and he gets his stuff stolen. And then that sends him on a trail of ultimately committing a crime. And I just thought that was kind of interesting that the Kurosawa film is almost like it's as compassionate, or maybe not as compassionate, because Bicycle Thieves is like just such a hugely empathetic, compassionate movie, but it's in that direction of being sort of as compassionate, but it comes from the perspective of the cops trying to arrest the guy, like, which is not, imagine if Bicycle Thieves was about that, that's going to arrest the dad for stealing the bike.
There's a couple of funny little bits of business as this kind of comes to an end, and he finally gets, he's looking for someone, thinking this gun's been going off to the people who sell guns and rent guns out. It's a funny little bit of business where he's lying on the fountain, just kind of exhausted at the end of the day, and this kind of raggedy looking street urchin fella jumps over a wall and comes up to him and says, "What do you want?" He says, "Have you got any guns?" He does this funny little gesture that doesn't look like a gun whenever he's asking for guns. And then they kind of half agree to make a deal, but then the guy starts throwing rocks at him as he runs away, and I just thought it's a really funny sales technique. Another
thing, so we mentioned the heat, and that's almost a character in this movie. But another thing that's almost a character in this movie is the rainfall. It was interesting reading in Kurosawa's autobiography about it, because he talks about how lucky. It's interesting as well. You said how this film seems more complex than some of his other films to make, because he talks about how this was the easiest film he ever made, and that it went so smoothly. And one of the examples of how smoothly it went is that in the scenes that called for rainfall, they had a fire truck on hand that was going to like drench everything in rain, but then it just started torrential rain during the scenes. So all of the rain you see in the film is just the torrential rain that happened to coincide with the production of the film in the scenes where it was intended to happen. And you really do. I mean, I'm not going to tell you I could tell the difference between fake Hollywood rain and real rain, but it does feel really authentic. There are bits where they're running through the downpour in the city, and it's so I don't know, tactile. It's so it just feels so real, doesn't it? And it is.
Absolutely. And then so they pick this. It gets to the point where eventually Sato's kind of introduced. He's instantly kind of more laid back. And I've got a little note here with like a buddy cop question mark, which it is what it is. I mean, this is the prototype for it, isn't it? The veteran and the rookie kind of mismatched personalities, the young kind of impetuous, overly keen rookie, or sometimes and the kind of the more world weary, laid back. There's kind of the different character traits get swapped around, but straight away there is this kind of okay, I can see what's going on here. And that does play out. I feel like they get matched up, they chat, they become friends. There's a scene where he goes back to the older man's house for dinner with the family, and they
eat his kids and all of that,
and they drink and get wax philosophical and all that kind of stuff. All that's a lot of the groundwork that you would see in so many things later on. I feel is I don't know if how many buddy cop films like that there were before this, but this seems like an early one to me anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I love the buddy pairing in it. Obviously, I'm a fan of Mifune and Shimura, I've already said, but I love as well, in like I talked about the Quiet Duel, how Kurosawa had seemingly made that, he said he made that film in order to show a different side to Mifune, because Mifune was playing all these wild gangsters and he wanted to show him playing something very different dramatically. And I feel like a similar thing's happening here, where Mifune is the straight man, and then the wild, crazy character goes to Shimura, who often in a lot of these films tends to be the quieter one and more of the straight man. And I love that they flip that in this, and I love that Shimura gets to be the wild one. Like I said in my Letterboxd review, like slightly joking, but I do sort of believe it, which is that Shimura is cool in this film, and like Mifune's the dork. And it's so weird because that's a pairing you'll see again and again, and it never flips this way again. It's just kind of fun to see that reversed.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I did think a little bit. There was a touch about there was a little touch of sort of Chris Nolan's protagonists a little bit. I can't quite put my finger on it, but because the other thing I wanted to flag up was the baseball scene, which is really nice, and that felt like a set piece from something there. Maybe something in one of the earlier films, but yeah, definitely there is. Shimura's having much more fun in this.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. Yeah, but he's not as he's not as constrained by the role. Mifune's got a stick within, because we don't see. I can't think of the guy's name. What's the guy who's got the gun called?
I can't remember, but I think it's called Yusa.
Yeah, but because we don't see him until the last sort of 10 minutes. I did actually put a note saying I wasn't expecting to see him at all. I wasn't expecting necessarily that this film needed a resolution or a climax. I started. I forget what I was going with this. Yeah, because Mifune needs to sort of be on that path until they clash at the end. Basically, he can't stray from it too much until that climactic meeting. Yeah, what did you make of the baseball scene?
I love the baseball scene. The baseball scene felt like something from the kinds of films you were saying you thought Stray Dog was going to be like at the beginning, those 70s movies. Like I can't name a film off the top of my head about it, but I've definitely seen that scene play out in American movies where the police are at the big game and there's a sniper or something in the crowd and they're trying to sort of find them in amongst all of that.
The one I remember, I think, is Safe House. I remember that it's like but I know it's in a lot of things, but I remember one being in a Denzel Washington, Ryan Reynolds film from 2011 called Safe House, because it was made in South Africa and shot during the World Cup, so they're at a World Cup game.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there was a detail I loved in it where The guy who's in the crowd, for one thing, just on the sort of slightly silly side of things again, I love how the criminal in the crowd is like obvious. Like everyone's in these like plain white suits, and then the criminal's in like a pinstripe suit, like a pimpy hat. Like he's clearly, it's like spot the Yakuza guy. He's clearly the Yakuza guy. But once they find the Yakuza guy, they have this idea of, well, we're not going to call him out here because he might be armed and we don't want to get people hurt. So we'll use the public address system and call him to come to the front, and then we'll pick him up.
He doesn't come with them. They use a different name, and they're like, try this name. Try this name.
Yeah, but what I really liked as a detail was when he comes to respond to the public address system, he walks down this hallway in the kind of the halls of the stadium to go down the steps to leave, and the crowd starts cheering. And he like runs back to like pop over the heads of some people who are watching to like see what happened in the baseball game. And I really love that. It was just like a little detail of like, well, yeah, this guy's at the game. Like he gives a shit about what's going on in it. And I felt like in a lot of movies, the criminal would be too hard or too cool or whatever to be interested in the baseball game. And I kind of like that this guy was, even though he's only in this like one scene. I quite like that.
Yeah, it was really nice. And that again, that kind of, there's lots of different flavors of film. There's the kind of the dirty underworld film. This had a bit more of an espionage flavor to it. There's a bit later where somebody's written a letter and they talk about killing a cat, and it kind of becomes almost like a serial killer kind of Zodiac-y kind of flavor to it. It kind of weaves through these different tones it really nicely. And there's a bit in the dance club, which is the probably the sweatiest part of it, where there's these showgirls dancing on stage quite vigorously, wearing very little. There's lots of sort of, you can hear sort of lots of heavy breathing when they come off stage, but they're sweaty, it's flashy. I was thinking this would not, I don't know when the Hays Code came in, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it would not pass the Hays Code. It's still pretty, even to watch it in 2021, it's pretty racy. And then the girls sort of go upstairs and collapse on the floor because they're hot. And they're just kind of this pile of bodies and flesh, just kind of trying to recover for the next show. And there's this kind of human physical cost of this. I
love the way they always collapse. Yeah. It almost feels like because the thing is with that dance as well, they seem very robotic, and it almost feels like that they've been powered down when they get upstairs. Another thing I wanted to mention about the movie was I love the kind of the bit when he's trying to pressure one of the showgirls to tell about her boyfriend, who turns out to be the guy with the gun, and they're trying to get kind of this lead from her about her boyfriend. And he's like, well, if you can live with yourself with kind of living with criminality and living on that side of things, why don't you put on this nice dress he bought you with this kind of ill-gotten gains? And he's trying to shame her into wearing this dress. And that really weird, really stylized, really melodramatic sequence where she puts the dress on and then she just does this mad dance in it and then just collapses, and the mum pulls it off for her and then she collapses crying, and like it does kind of strain at the very edges of sort of acceptable sort of melodrama. But I really loved I love the kind of the heightened emotion of that sequence and the kind of slight madness of it.
Aside from the scene with I think his name Yusa.
Yeah, I think so.
Written down. So the scene with his sister, what you were saying about Kurosawa and female characters not being known for really representing women characters very well at all. That's starting to feel like that's starting to fall down now. Those concerns are, there is the kind of the Scarlet Woman, if you like. Do you know what I mean? Thing going on. And this is kind of where that's what, and it's, at this point she talks about the belongings being stolen, and Mifune says my stuff was stolen, and you've got this kind of, there's this little thematic thing going on that is clearly like a seed for Rashomon. And like, I know I've not seen Rashomon, but when we come to talk about Rashomon, if anybody knows anything about film, knows the basic principle of Rashomon. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. This idea that there is a divergent path or divergent stories or different ways that stories can be told and unfold thing going on, and you know, the kind of the humanism and the philosophy of it all was starting to come out. And in the same conversation around about the same time, Mifune asked, was it my cult? And Sato answers, if it wasn't, it would have been a Browning.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know, there is these kind of philosophical kind of questions that the film's trying to pose come more and more to the front, and you kind of realize that this kind of weaving through different people, the people who own the clubs, the people who sell the guns, the people who pick the pockets, it started to remind me a lot of The Wire, actually. That kind of, you kind of feel like I was getting a real overview of everything from every perspective, especially again seeing as Mifune Murakami is so for the most part single-minded in what he's doing. Most of the drama or the kind of the perspective you get from the scenes comes from those incidental characters. And it made me think about the way David Simon paints that picture in The Wire.
Interesting comparison. I haven't really thought about that. Something I wanted to bring up was in the same way that Drunken Angel, there's this question mark over who is the Drunken Angel. You know, is it the drunken doctor with a heart of gold, or is it this gangster who then gets covered in white at the end and kind of falls angelic on the rooftop? You know, this film does the same thing, where the stray dog you would assume is the criminal.
It's the dog. It's the dog at the beginning, isn't it?
Panting in the beginning, but the stray dog is painted in some ways to be the criminal. The Shimura character Sato, he spells out that you know, that a criminal like that is like a wild dog, and they get their mind set on one thing and they kind of just go towards that. But that's a clear parallel with the Mifune character, because he's obsessed with one thing. He's obsessed with finding his gun, and he's running around like the stray dog. The Ritchie book goes further into the metaphor, talking about how the criminal's note about killing the cat paints him as the dog as well, because the criminal, you know, dogs don't like cats, but then the criminal also says that he's like the cat, so maybe the criminal's the cat, which would then make Mifune the dog because he's chasing him. And it's this, like, I think Ritchie takes it a bit too far, but there is definitely a lot of that I think is intentional in the film, and is quite interesting sort of subtext to it. And I thought some of that's quite cleverly worked in.
I think this is basically where, although we still get to move around and see different things, it's this point in the film where it's like, right, we've shown you everything, but we've spelled out what the film's about, and we're on the track now, and we're going after this character. They reiterate, like, there's 5 bullets left in the gun, so that kind of the incidental kind of oh, there were 7 bullets in it. Oh, he shot one. That starts to tick over as something that might be important a little bit more. And then after he gives the stray dog metaphor, it literally cuts to a shot of the front of a train going forward on tracks, just to properly ram it home. So the main themes have all been laid out at this point. And it's like we sort of move in towards narrative resolution at that point, don't we? Like everything's focused and moving, and it kind of it's just really, there's a real kind of elegance to the construction of the film at that point, that everything has kind of neatly come from these disparate places and slotted in, and it's going to propel you forward towards your resolution, even though I wasn't necessarily expecting a resolution at that point. No.
It's interesting that you bring up the train thing, because it's not Kurosawa's most heavy-handed use of cutting to a train as a metaphor, which will come in Dreams, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But it's interesting that you pointed out here. So overall, I'll talk a little bit about the production of it as well, because I haven't talked about that yet. So when we covered Drunken Angel and Quiet Jaw, I talked a bit about how I think it was like the third Toho strike happened. Toho was the big film studio Kurosawa was working for as an assistant director in the kind of the early 40s, and then became a director there, made all his first films for Toho. Then Shin Toho got founded because of a situation where loads of the actors left and formed their own studio, so they didn't have any movie stars, which is how Toshiro Mifune was discovered. Then there was, in between the making of Drunken Angel, during making Drunken Angel and I think No Regrets for Our Youth before that, there was this other sort of third big strike at the studio, a big shake-up again. And then Kurosawa left and determined he just couldn't work for those people anymore. So you get Quiet Jewel, which was made on a much lower budget, much more pared down because he was working with much more sort of inexperienced crew and fewer resources for a studio called, I don't know how it's pronounced, Daiei, I think. But then with this film, Stray Dog, he goes and works for Shin Toho, which is the studio that was founded by all of the actors who left. So he's kind of still away from Toho doing this. And he kind of talks about, you know, how there's been during this whole thing, reading bits from his autobiography, a kind of undercurrent that perhaps Kurosawa's an asshole, just underneath there. There's a bit,
at least a partridge.
Yeah, at least a bit of a partridge. And
he's somewhere on the scale between Partridge and Morgan, isn't he?
And he basically there's a bit in his autobiography around this film where he's talking about the difficulties of, as well, they had to shoot it. They didn't shoot it at the Shin Toho studios. They shot it somewhere else. And he just says this is because of the difficulties it would have presented him going to the Shin Toho studio, because there was still so much bad blood between Toho and Shin Toho, which makes me think that lots of people at Shin Toho thought he was a cunt, basically. Another thing I want to bring up, because this is my favorite part of his autobiography so far. Like this is absolutely brilliant. This is peak Partridge. He talks about how the shot of the panting dog at the start, how it led to a complaint from an American woman who'd been watching filming, who represented the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
Excellent. I love this already.
She claimed apparently that they'd taken a healthy dog and injected the healthy dog with rabies. Kurosawa said he describes this as a patently false charge. He said that they rescued a dog from a shelter and they exercised it a lot to get his tongue panting, but he couldn't convince this woman that it wasn't this kind of act of cruelty. He talks about Yama-san, who was his great kind of mentor, director who he worked under. Yama-san had to come to the set to confirm that he was a dog lover, which sounds like something from a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. Like he's had to go, Yama-san, come on, tell this lady, you know, like he's like this like slight or this kind of misunderstanding. So he gets Yama-san to come and say he's dog lover, and he wouldn't do it, and the lady insists. And he says, "This is chef's kiss. This." At this point, I lost all patience. I was ready to tell her that the cruelty to animals came from her side. People are animals too. And if we're subjected to things like this, we need a society for the prevention of cruelty to humans. My colleagues did their best to calm me down. In the end, I was forced to write a deposition, and I never at any other moment experienced a stronger sense of regret over Japan's losing the war. That is isn't it?
That's amazing. That's
amazing.
Oh, I would love. I wish he was alive today just to see what he would make of Twitter. I'd love. I'd love to see tweets from Akira Kurosawa on all sorts of issues. That's beautiful.
There's a bit on the next page I'll mention just because of what you said about his sort of treatment of women in movies. He talks about he gives loads of praise to this assistant art director who worked really hard on the film, and how he became his regular art director from this point onwards. And he talks about, he gives a shout out to this guy who's already mentioned before. He says the ones who really slaved to put it all together were his assistant Muraki and a female assistant. who he doesn't name. And then in the next paragraph he mentions as well, against the sunset sky I saw two silhouettes on top of the wooded hill. Muraki and the girl assistant were sitting there. Fine. Yeah, can't be bothered with that. There's another bit here which is great Kurosawa. I laughed out loud at this one heartily. He talks about how after he made the film, the camaraderie of making the film and everything, how it was sad to sort of leave the crew and everything at the end. And what he says about that is, I always felt more loneliness at being separated from my crew than I did joy at being reunited with my family. I'll say as well, just in the capping off of the biography section of this, there's a bit here where he really throws under the bus the actress in the film who plays the dancer. Have I got a page reference for that? Yeah, 106. So yeah, he talks about how Awaji Keiko. He says that there was a familial atmosphere and that they're all friends making the film. They had a really great time making the film. He says the only problem was Awaji Keiko, a dancer I dragged on from the Shochiko review stage. Shochiko is another company, film company in Japan. This ingenue was spoiled enough to be a full measure of trouble. She was only 16 years old, had never acted before, and all she really wanted to do was dance. She would fret and fuss no matter what she was asked to do, and in places where she was supposed to cry, she would burst out laughing at pure contrariness. As time went by and the crew befriended her, it seems that Waji began to find the work more and more interesting. Unfortunately, by that time, her job was finished.
Oh,
that final line there just made me laugh so much. He's just like, yeah, she started to like it by the end, but it's too late. She's shit.
He doesn't come across well. When did you read this book for the first time?
I read it for the first time when I was at university, so in the mid 2000s, and I read it just with wide-eyed, childlike kind of admiration, and it's only coming to it now, probably as a more mature but probably slightly more woke in my mid-30s, reading it, just seeing all the subtext of him probably being a bit of a dick, and it's a really fun read for that reason. There's lots of, joking aside, there's loads of really good stuff in here as well about the filmmaking process and everything. One of the things I should also mention from his autobiography, won't read a passage about it, but it's worth mentioning, is that he wrote this film as a novel first. And he thought if he wrote it because the idea in his head came from a news story he read that a police officer had lost their gun. And then from that, he had this idea. But he envisaged it as being like an American crime novel. Lots of Kurosawa's influences. One of the reasons he often gets criticized as being too Western in Japan. And I guess one of the reasons he's translated so well coming back the other way, his films being remade in the US in particular, is because a lot of his influences are American stuff. John Ford, obviously, but also a lot of the things that he's like High and Low, my favorite Kurosawa film, is based on an American book. You've got Shakespeare, he does an adaptation of. Lots of his influences come from Europe and from the US, and he does lots of things where that sort of stuff touches in. So as part of that, he wrote Stray Dog in the style of an American crime novel. And then, which he says took him 6 weeks, which again is like, he's super fast writing. So he wrote a novel in 6 weeks, and then he then adapted that novel into the screenplay for this film. That's bizarre. I've not heard of any other case of a director doing that.
No,
extreme.
I mean, before we kind of sum up our feelings, I really want to spend some time talking about the ending. Because the ending's really strong. I mean, I was saying before that once you have the heavy-handed railway metaphor, it feels like there has to be a resolution now, and it needs to go towards somewhere. I was thinking, like I say, for a while I felt like it didn't even necessarily had to have a resolution. If you're spending time running around all these places, it could be that he gets away with the gun and he's never found, and it becomes, like the churn of the city kind of thing. But there is this, it goes along these kind of plot lines whereby they set up a trap for him. One person's waiting at another person's waiting at another place. They chat. Sato gets shot and is badly wounded, leaving Mifune bereft and kind of ready to sort of possibly over the edge. Like, what's he going to do to this guy when he finds him? And he's picked up these clues about him being left-handed and having muddy trousers. And he goes off to this train station where he's supposed to be meeting his girlfriend, and Mifune sits there and waits, and he looks across all these. He looks around the carriage and looks at people's trousers, and everyone's got these perfectly clean trousers.
Yeah, I love that scene.
And then there's it's just mud, isn't it? It's not like a little bit of mud, or it's like he looks like he's been splashing in puddles.
Yeah, it's really funny. It's kind of unintentionally funny. I love that scene. Like, no irony. Like, I love that scene. But what is funny about it is that, like, he goes, "Oh yeah, the guy ran through mud, so I'll look for someone with muddy shoes." And then he goes really slowly, padding past the shoes, and you expect he's just going to notice because he's like a good cop, like a bit of mud on the bottom of somebody's shoes. But it's literally a guy who, from the kind of waist down, is just mud.
That made me try. It's still great, and then he kind of pulls some matches out and strikes it with his left hand. He realizes it's him, and then there's this kind of proto contra zoom, reverse zoom, as they kind of meet each other's eye. He realizes he's a cop and he's going for him, and the guy stands up and jumps out the window, but the camera pulls back from the other side, and it looks a bit like a reverse zoom. I had to slow it down and watch it a couple of times. I don't think it quite is, but it's like, and then this chase is on, and they go out and they run through the woods and get into this really sort of primal swamp fight, and at one point he gets the better of Mifune, and he's got the drop on him with the gun, and that's when you realize how many bullets are left. Like, because he takes a shot, and I think he hits him in the shoulder or something. Like, he hits him.
I think he hits him in the arm, and like the blood's running down his hand.
Yeah. And the guy's like kind of stunned that he's shot him. He doesn't like go in for the kill. There's this really nice bit of business where it cuts to a woman playing the piano in a lovely little house. She kind of hears something and stops and looks out the window and shrugs it off and goes back, and it's this comment on the middle classes being unaware of what's going on around them, kind of thing. It's nice. It's kind of a nice little moment. But then the guy kind of he doesn't stop Mifune. Mifune keeps coming, and he shoots another couple of times, wastes the bullets, and then you're like, I wasn't quite sure how many bullets he had left. I knew he had a maximum of 4. Or then again, like the other thing popped into my head, but of course he could just reload the thing. But there is this kind of, the number of bullets become crucial in that scene. You're like, I don't know how many he's got. How many's he got left? Is he going to be able? And then they're both at the end of this primal fight. They're both kind of spent, and there's this kind of victory of him finally getting the cuffs on him, and they lay down in the swamp in the water, like both defeated. And there's a bit where like a bunch of school kids go past singing, and you go, not sure that was necessary. But it's like a really, really just kind of like they're in exactly the same final position. They're both beaten, they're both exhausted. The only difference is one's wearing cuffs and one isn't. And they're lying side by side at the end of all of this. And it's just a really, really tense, well put together scene.
It is. It's something I mentioned with Drunken Angel that we'll see again and again, particularly in Rashomon, but you'll see it in Seven Samurai, you'll see it as we go forward, is the way Kurosawa shoots two men having a fight is people out of breath, writhing around on the floor. Both of them look stupid. Like, there's no dignity to it. It's rough. They're both scared. There's panicking. Like in the confrontation at the end of Drunken Angel, like the gangster who's trying to kill Mifune, the guy looks terrified. They're both trying to get away from the other one. They're both, sweating and panting. And you get that here. They both fall on the floor at the end, defeated. After writhing around in the mud. I love that.
I really thought that was just brilliant. It was the perfect ending to it. There's a small unnecessary coda afterwards where he visits Sato back in the hospital, and he kind of says, "You've had your first citation. You need to stop worrying about all this stuff." And they wrap it all up in a little. He wraps it all up in a little bow, and you go, "What does this 90 seconds add to the film?" Like,
I think. Well, if I was being really critical of the film, I think I would question what the Mifune character really learns from the whole thing, because what strikes me through the film, and the metaphor of the stray dog who kind of only goes after this thing they want and everything, is that the whole way through the film, Mifune cares about the gun at the expense of everything else. He gets told off by his superiors for only focusing on the gun. He could have got other guns. He could have other people, but he's too obsessed with his gun. The fact that when Sato-san gets shot and he's just walking around the hospital going, "But was it my gun though? But was it my gun though? Come on, guys, was it my gun? Tell me if it was my gun." You're sort of like, everyone must be just sick of this guy at this point. It's not just about your gun as much as you've got the moral dilemma going on, which the film's about, but he kind of is too obsessed with it to some extent. And I'm not sure if the film ever has a resolution for that. I'm not sure.
I don't think this is why I was saying I wasn't sure we were going to get a resolution. I didn't feel like I needed one. I felt like I was getting a cross-sectional view of the state of play. And if that cycle continues, that's enough for me. The Wire finishes with all the major characters basically being taken over by younger versions of themselves, and everything continuing as was. So there's a sense. The sense from the ending that I got was that Mifune was going to become more and more like the Sato character. He's going to become a little bit more jaded, a little bit more laid back, but ultimately just not care as much.
I mean, that's what the singing children are, isn't it? They're the innocence he no longer has. They're the contrast on the floor. But yeah, I was really happy to see, because obviously starting off with Kurosawa's, doing it all in chronological order, you've had like a slow ramp up to the really good stuff. And I'm interested to check in with you on where you currently are. Fandom wise is probably not a great way to put it, but how your current feeling is, what your temperature is at the moment on Kurosawa overall, whether you're starting to see the hype, why he's a master, all that kind of thing. Is that apparent, or are we still waiting for?
No. This is clearly stone cold classic. Like, this is brilliant filmmaking, and for me, it's better than anything we've seen so far. I really like this. Like, things don't. If something's going to remind me of The Wire, it's got to be damn good for me to like it. Like, do you know what I mean? I've seen things that have tried to do that and have not done it, and it's like, but no, this and not that it's a strange comparison, but that's what came into my head, and I thought this was just really, really strong. Aside from a little lull in the last 25 minutes or so, it was kind of breathless and really, really good. I would put it, it's top of the tree for both appreciation and enjoyment
on the high and low scale. So like at the very top, of both.
It's not a 10 out of 10 for me, but it is it's a good 9. Okay. Yeah, there we go.
Nice. We might have to expand the scale out, because I'm hoping that some of the later ones will there won't be room for them at this rate. But
this feels, because I know that this is a famous one. Once you dig into it, it's not the one that, it's not the Seven Samurai. It's not one that like a lot of people would have heard of. This felt like the one that, if I had done what you did and watched them all while I was at university, this would be the one that I would have at least said was my favorite, to make myself look smarter. But you haven't seen Stray Dog, have you? That sort of thing.
Drunken Angel's that one for me. Drunken Angel's my early go-to. Like, I personally prefer Drunken Angel, but I think I prefer Drunken Angel. I think this has a much more compelling story and setup than Drunken Angel, which is why we'll talk about it very briefly. There's an episode of Star Wars Clone Wars, which is a remake of Stray Dog. You couldn't do a Star Wars episode of Clone Wars remake of Drunken Angel. Like, Stray Dog had such a Stray Dog, like Seven Samurai, like Yojimbo, has a story that you could easily adapt a million ways. Like, it's got a very simple story. You could do Stray Dog set in medieval times, and the sheriff's lost his sword or whatever. It doesn't matter. It can be anywhere. And that's, I think it's got a lot of power for that reason. What I really like about Drunken Angel is I really like the two characters, and I really like those two actors in those roles. I think Mifune is allowed to kind of go off the chain a lot in Drunken Angel, and there's bits towards the end of that movie where he's kind of not frothing at the mouth, but like staggering around all gaunt and sick and kind of crazed eyes, and he's trying to murder this guy, and that always sticks in my mind really powerfully, like as images. But no, I think as a story, Stray Dog is by far and away the best one so far.
Yeah, this really did kind of blow me away. Actually, it's really thoroughly enjoyed this film, and then immediately watched the Star Wars remake,
Yeah, so basically, for context, there's an episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars. It's like episode 11 of series 2, and it's called Lightsaber Lost. Anyone who's got Disney Plus, it's it's obviously on there and all the rest of it. And basically, the rookie cop is like a rookie Jedi, a Padawan Jedi. Called Ahsoka, who is like, it doesn't matter for the purposes of this, but she's Anakin's Padawan. But basically, Ahsoka is the Mifune character. She loses her lightsaber kind of carelessly at the start. Then she gets teamed up with the veteran cop. They even kind of go to the library and look at pictures of pickpockets and everything, and they go on a very similar sort of run through.
There is a little bit of business there actually, where because they say he's from an aquatic planet, and obviously it's partly it's I know it's got adult fans, but for a child audience to go or child audience for the show, they go, that means that means a water planet, and the Shimura character says, I knew there was something fishy about him, and I couldn't help but feel within context that was probably a racist remark. Like
I said that because I watched it last night with my wife after the film, and I was like, within Star Wars, that's racism, isn't it? Like, within the context of Star Wars, calling him a fishy guy is a bit weird. But yeah, so they go through that. She meets this Shimura character who is never in another episode of Star Wars Clone Wars. He's like a one-shot guy. He's the Takashi Shimura character, the old cop, and he's a bit more kindly and fatherly and stuff than the Shimura character is. I mean, he's just a really kind of cozy fellow, but they boil down some of the moral lessons. Obviously they make it more. There's a clearer moral because it's a kids thing, but they take some of the aspects like Mifune's character being too hasty and just running away and not necessarily thinking some of it through is something that they very much follow through with her. They have a bit where the old Shimura-like Jedi actually basically says the whole point of Stray Dog to her. He's walking along and he's like, you're worried that anything that happens with this lightsaber is going to be your fault. She's kind of like, yeah, that's what Stray Dog's about, and it's in this episode of Clone Wars, and it's kind of interesting because there's an episode of Clone Wars later on which is a Seven Samurai remake. I think there may even be a Yojimbo remake episode, but those are less surprising because those films have been remade and kind of referenced so many times to the point where there being a Seven Samurai style episode of a kind of action thing is almost like a trope, rather than even necessarily a remake. But what's really interesting is this is a relatively obscure Kurosawa film being remade into this kids show, and I find that really strange, like in a really good way. Like it's really not. Well, how did you feel? Because you're not even really a Star Wars fan. How did you feel like seeing this like this?
Yeah, no, I liked it. It was perfectly watchable. Like, and for the first sort of 10-15 minutes, it pretty much hits the beats, and then they chuck in some action stuff, don't they? Of which they have to, of course. But there is kind of a sense that because it kind of delves into the underworld in the same way, and there's a sense that the characters who've stolen and got hold of this lightsaber are doing it out of desperation as well. They're not just there's the pickpocket who passes it on, and the people who end up with it there's a sense of desperation and wanting to leave about them as well. So it was quite a nice little like condensation of the film into 25 minutes, I thought. And they even make the Shimura character look a bit like a dog as well, with the long ears and the nose and everything. It's a weird little curio, I thought.
Yeah, it's very strange. I can't think of what would be an equivalent of that in anything else. Like I like if you find out that there's an episode of Ben 10 based on Fanny and Alexander or something.
Yeah,
it's such a weird thing. But yeah, and it kind of makes sense as well because of the debt that Star Wars obviously owes to Kurosawa films, in particular Hidden Fortress, but more generally, and George Lucas's kind of love of them. I mean, even in this episode of Clone Wars, you get the wipes, which are a Kurosawa sort of staple in terms of the filmmaking. So the idea of more Kurosawa being folded into Star Wars is kind of fitting as well. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, if you're a big Kurosawa fan and you've not seen this, it's worth a watch just because, like I say, it's very strange that this thing exists and it's kind of fun. So yeah, we've got Scandal next, which full disclosure, Scandal is a film I watched once. A lot of these I've seen a few times. I've only seen Scandal the once, and it was like 15 years ago. And I don't remember it very well at all. So I'm almost going to be watching Scandal for the first time. I feel like I'm going relatively blind on it. So based on what you've read from the strapline or from, what it says on the bio, what is it that you're sort of expecting with Scandal?
Well, this we're jumping sources here because Scandal's not available on the BFI player, which is what I've been getting, but it is available on the Criterion channel. So it says here, a handsome, suave Toshiro Mifune lights up the screen as painter Ichiro, whose circumstantial meeting with a famous singer is twisted by the tabloid press into a torrid affair. Ichiro files a lawsuit against a seedy gossip magazine, but his lawyer, Hiruta, is playing both sides, a portrait of cultural moral decline. Scandal is also a compelling courtroom drama and a moving tale of human redemption. I don't know. That sounds odd. It sounds a little bit ranty about people's obsession with celebrity, which I'm quite up for. Especially, I think there'll be some really nice little moments in the autobiography about that.
Yeah. It sounds like, no, I have seen it, but because I don't remember it very well. To me, it brings to mind Capra. You know how there's a few Capra films. He's already very heavily sort of made a Capra-esque film with One Wonderful Sunday, but there's a few Capra films. I think Meet John Doe is probably one of the more famous ones, where they kind of end up in a courtroom and they're all about the sort of similar sort of concerns in some ways.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, what were you going to say?
Well, the only other thing that it sounded like to begin with was Notting Hill.
yeah, I suppose so. It's the proto Notting Hill. Okay,
it's Notting Hill through an Alan Partridge rant lens, by the sounds of things, with a little bit of courtroom drama thrown in for good measure. And I do love a courtroom drama.
If you can get hold of it as well, there's an episode of Peppa Pig that is a remake of that.
Excellent.
So yeah, we'll leave it there then. So next time around it's Scandal, and then after that we're on to Rashomon and the real big. Then he goes on a run of all the greatest hits. So I'm really excited to get to some of those as well. So
and just apologies, I will try and sort out my background for the next one because I've moved my desk around and getting a very overexposed wardrobe, which I haven't been able to do anything about. I'm sorry about that.
Well, no one's coming to us for the kind of audio-visual fidelity, I don't think, at this time. But yeah, awesome. So so yeah, we'll talk next time on Scandal then. See you in a couple of weeks.
Cheers.
Bye.